Right now on Earth, there's one kind of human, just one, us. That feels normal. It feels like it's always been this way, but it hasn't. For most of human history, we weren't alone, not even close. There were other kinds of humans walking around, different species, living in the same forests, hunting the same animals, sometimes even sharing the same caves. Think about that for a second. Not other animals that were kind of like us, actual humans, different branches of the same family tree, walking upright, making tools, raising kids, burying their dead. Around 300,000 years ago, at least 4 different human species shared this planet at the same time. Some scientists think the number might have been even higher. We know about 4 for sure because we've found their bones, their tools, and in a few strange cases their DNA still living inside us today. There was Homo sapiens, that's us. We showed up in Africa around 300,000 years ago, give or take. There was Homo neanderthalensis, the Neanderthals, thick-boned, strong, built for cold weather. They lived across Europe and parts of Asia for over 300,000 years. Longer than we've been around, actually. There was Homo erectus, one of the oldest and longest-lasting human species we know of. They'd already been walking the Earth for over 1 million years by the time we showed up. 1 million years. Try to sit with that number for a second. And then there was a species so strange, archaeologists almost didn't believe it. Homo floresiensis, nicknamed the Hobbit. Tiny humans, barely 3 feet tall, living on a small island in Indonesia called Flores. Small brains, but they made tools. They hunted. They survived on that island for tens of thousands of years, cut off from the rest of the world. 4 species. 4 completely different ways of being human. All alive at the same time, all doing the same basic things, eating, sleeping, raising families, trying to make it through another day. And now, there's just one. Here's what gets me about this. It's not ancient history in the way we usually think about ancient history. This isn't dinosaurs. This isn't some distant, cold fact from a textbook. These were people. Not people exactly like us, but close. Close enough that some of them had our blood in their veins. Close enough that we could probably have had a conversation with a Neanderthal, if either of us had known the other's language. And for most of that time, nobody was in charge. There was no dominant human species running the show. We were just one option among several. One experiment among many, all happening at once, all figuring out how to survive. Then, somewhere between 40,000 and 12,000 years ago, depending on which species you're talking about, they disappeared, one by one. The hobbits went first, as far as we can tell, then Homo erectus, though the exact timing is still debated. Then, most famously, the Neanderthals. By around 12,000 years ago, they were all gone. Every single one, except us. That's the part that should stop you for a second. Out of at least 4 human species living side by side, only one made it to today, and it wasn't obvious that it would be us. Neanderthals were stronger. They'd survived ice ages we can barely imagine. Homo erectus had lasted longer than any human species in history. We were the new ones, the unproven ones, and somehow we're the ones still standing. So what happened to the others? Did we outcompete them? Did the climate wipe them out? Did we just absorb them, generation by generation, until their differences disappeared into our shared bloodline? Nobody knows for certain, not fully. Scientists have pieces, bones in caves, fragments of ancient DNA, tools left behind in places no living person has walked in tens of thousands of years. But here's the part that stays with me. We used to be one of several, now we're the only one left, and the story of how that happened is stranger and lonelier than most people realize. Let's zoom out for a second, because the timeline here is bigger than most people think. Humans, in one form or another, have been around for about 2 million years. Not us specifically, the wider family, the genus scientists call Homo. 2 million years of walking, hunting, building, dying, and starting over. Compare that to something you know. Ancient Egypt lasted around 3,000 years. The Roman Empire lasted about 1,000. All of written history, every king, every war, every book ever written fits into roughly 5,000 years. 2 million years is almost 400 times longer than that, and for nearly all of it, more than one kind of human was alive at the same time. Not for a short overlap, not for a strange fluke moment. For most of the whole 2 million year stretch, the planet had company. Different human species living their own lives, on their own timelines, often without ever knowing the others existed. Here's what makes this hard to picture. We're used to thinking of human history as one long line. One species marching forward, getting smarter, building more stuff. But that's not what happened. It wasn't a line. It was more like a tree with a bunch of branches growing at the same time. Some branches grew fast, some grew slow, some just stopped. And the branches weren't isolated from each other. They grew in the same forests, walked the same coastlines, sometimes crossed paths entirely by accident, the way two hikers might run into each other on the same mountain without planning it. Think about the sheer scale of time involved. Homo erectus, the long-lasting one we mentioned before, didn't just last a long time. They spread out across huge parts of the world. Fossils turn up in Africa, in China, in Indonesia. That's not a small tribe hanging around one valley. That's a species that made it across entire continents, using nothing but their own 2 legs and whatever tools they could carry. And they did this without metal, without writing, without anything we'd recognize as a map. They just walked, generation after generation, moving a little farther, adapting to new plants, new animals, new weather. It took unbelievable patience. Or maybe it wasn't patience at all. Maybe it was just what living things do when there's more room to explore and no reason not to. Now, here's a number that's easy to say but hard to really feel. Homo erectus lasted for close to 1.9 million years, depending on how you count the start and end dates. Neanderthals lasted more than 300,000 years. We've been here so far for about 300,000 years too. Put those side by side. We've existed for roughly the same amount of time the Neanderthals did, but Erectus outlasted both of us combined several times over. If humans ever build a species that lasts as long as they did, it won't be for hundreds of thousands of years from now. It'll be millions. That should change how you think about success in evolution. We tend to assume being smarter automatically means lasting longer. But Erectus didn't have our kind of brain. They didn't paint on cave walls or carve symbols into bone, as far as we know. And yet they outlived every other human species by an enormous margin. Maybe intelligence isn't the only thing that matters. Maybe it's not even the main thing. Maybe simple, steady survival, doing the same basic things well, generation after generation, counts for more than we like to admit. Now picture the world these species were living in. It wasn't one climate. It wasn't one type of land. Some of these humans lived through ice ages, when huge sheets of ice crept down over Europe and North America, turning green land into frozen tundra. Others lived in warm river valleys in Africa, where the challenge wasn't cold, it was drought, and finding water that didn't dry up halfway through the dry season. Neanderthals were built for the cold. Thick bones, strong compact bodies that held heat well, wide noses that warmed freezing air before it hit their lungs. They weren't just surviving the cold, they were shaped by it, physically, over hundreds of thousands of years. Homo sapiens, meanwhile, were shaped by Africa's heat. Lighter bones, long limbs built to lose heat fast, not trap it. Different tools, different clothing, if they wore any at all in the earliest days. Two completely different survival kits, built by two completely different environments, running at the same time on the same planet. And the hobbits, those tiny humans on the island of Flores, were shaped by something else entirely. Islands do strange things to bodies over time. When there's limited food and no predators chasing you across long distances, big bodies stop being useful. Smaller bodies need less food. Smaller bodies survive better on a small island with limited resources. Over tens of thousands of years, something made those humans shrink down to about 3 feet tall. That's not a flaw. That's not a broken version of a human. That's a different solution to the same basic problem every living thing faces. How to survive with what you've got in the place you're stuck in. So you had one planet. 4 completely different answers to the same question. How do you stay alive generation after generation in a world that keeps changing? Here's what strikes me most about all this. None of these species were trying to become the human species. None of them knew there was a competition happening. They weren't racing towards some finish line called modern civilization. They were just living, finding food, raising kids, trying to get through winter, trying to get through summer, doing what every animal on Earth has always done, just with slightly bigger brains and better tools. The idea that one of them would eventually end up alone, the last human standing on the whole planet, would have sounded insane to any of them. If you could have explained it to a Neanderthal hunting in the snow 100,000 years ago, they probably wouldn't have understood the question. Why would there only be one kind of human? There had always been more than one. That was just how the world worked, but the world was already changing under their feet. Slowly, quietly. The kind of change you can't see while it's happening, only afterward, looking back. Ice ages came and went. Sea levels rose and fell, sometimes connecting islands to the mainland, sometimes cutting them off completely. Forests turned into grasslands. Grasslands turned into deserts. Every shift in the climate rewrote the rules for every species trying to survive it. Some species could handle those shifts, some couldn't. Some got lucky, some didn't. And somewhere in the middle of all that shifting ground, ice, heat, hunger, migration, one species started pulling ahead. Not instantly, not obviously. It happened slowly enough that nobody alive at the time could have noticed it happening. We know how the story ends because we're the ones telling it now, but if you'd stood on that same land 300,000 years ago, watching 4 different kinds of humans hunting, building fires, raising children under the same stars, you wouldn't have been able to guess which one would still be here. You might not have even guessed correctly that only one would survive at all. That's where we're headed next. Because the story of how we became the last one standing doesn't start with us winning. It starts with each of those other species living their own long, full lives, long before anyone knew how the story would end. If you're using this to fall asleep, that's exactly why I make these videos. There's something nice about drifting off while learning something true. Your brain relaxes, the facts sink in slower. Nobody's testing you on this later, so maybe hit subscribe if you want more of these, and if you feel like it, leave a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I actually check these. It's kind of amazing to scroll through and see it all laid out. Someone in Tokyo watching as the sun comes up. Someone in London on their lunch break half paying attention. Someone in California wide awake at midnight staring at the ceiling. All of you, spread across different time zones, different days even, listening to the same slow story about the same distant past. It's a strange kind of company. Quiet. Scattered across the whole planet. But real. All right. Let's get back to it. Because the story starts with us. Let's start with us. Homo sapiens. The species you belong to. And here's something strange right away. We showed up much earlier than most people think. Fossils found in Morocco push our story back to around 300,000 years. skulls that look almost exactly like yours, same rounded shape, same small face, same brain size. If you dressed one of those people in jeans and a t-shirt and put them on a train, nobody would look twice. But here's the puzzle. For the first stretch of that history, there's barely any sign of what we think of as human behaviour. No cave paintings, no jewellery, no signs of trading goods over long distances, just simple stone tools, similar to what other human species were already making. So the body showed up first, the mind came later, or at least the proof of the mind came later, and that gap is one of the strangest puzzles in our whole story. Let's talk about the body first, because it's worth understanding what made us different from the start. Our skeletons were lighter than other human species alive at the time, thinner bones, less muscle mass built into the frame. That sounds like a disadvantage, less raw strength, but it came with a trade-off. Our bodies used energy more efficiently. We didn't need as much food to survive. In a world where finding enough calories was a daily struggle, that difference mattered. Our skulls were different too, rounder, higher at the back. That rounded shape gave a little more room to certain parts of the brain, especially areas linked to memory and planning. Other human species had brains just as large as ours, sometimes larger. But the shape of the brain seems to have mattered as much as the size. Now here's where it gets interesting. Around 70,000 years ago, something shifted. Suddenly there's an explosion of new behaviour showing up in the evidence. Beads made from shells, found far from any coast, meaning people were trading them across long distances. Pieces of ochre, a red pigment carved with patterns that look deliberate, not random scratches. Actual designs repeated across different sites. Around 40,000 years ago, the evidence gets even richer. Cave walls in France and Spain covered in paintings of horses, bison and deer, done with a level of skill that still stuns people today. Flutes carved from bone, burial sites with bodies laid out carefully, sometimes with tools or ornaments placed beside them, like someone wanted the dead to have company on their way out. This is the part that keeps researchers up at night. Why the gap? If our brains were fully modern 300,000 years ago, why did it take over 200,000 years for art and culture to show up in a way we can actually see? There are a few theories. One idea is that the behaviour was there all along, but it just didn't survive. Think about it. Paintings on skin don't last. Songs don't fossilise. Stories told around a fire vanish the moment the fire goes out. Maybe early humans were already doing complex symbolic things, and we simply lost the evidence. Another theory points to population size. Small groups, spread thin across the landscape, don't build big cultural traditions the way large connected groups do. If your band has 20 people, and you lose your best toolmaker or your best storyteller, that skill might just disappear. It takes a certain number of people staying in contact with each other, trading ideas back and forth, for culture to build up and stick around. Some researchers think that around 70,000 years ago, human groups reached a kind of critical mass. Enough people, close enough together, to keep new ideas alive long enough for them to spread. A third theory is more about language. Maybe the switch wasn't about population. Maybe it was about how we talked. If early language was simple, mostly about pointing at things and naming them, it would limit what people could plan and imagine together. But if language crossed some threshold, letting people talk about things that weren't right in front of them, about the past, about the future, about ideas that don't physically exist, that would open up a whole new world. You can't paint a myth if you can't first tell one. Nobody knows for sure which of these theories is right. Maybe it's some mix of all three. What we do know is that once this shift happened, it happened fast, and it never really slowed down. Compare that to the other human species alive at the same time. They had big brains too. Neanderthals, who we'll get to soon, had brains that were, on average, slightly larger than ours. But their tools barely change for tens of thousands of years at a stretch. A hand axe made 100,000 years ago looked almost the same as one made 50,000 years before that. Slow, steady, functional. Nothing wrong with it. It worked, but it didn't build on itself the way our tools did. Our tools, once that shift kicked in, started changing generation after generation. Spear points got sharper, sewing needles appeared, letting people make fitted clothing instead of just wrapping in hides. Fish hooks showed up, nets, boats good enough to cross open water, which is how humans eventually reached Australia, an island continent, at least 65,000 years ago. That's not a short swim, that's open ocean, with no land in sight, using boats built from nothing but early tools and imagination. Here's what gets me about this part of the story. It's not that we were smarter than the others in some simple single way. It's that we somehow figured out how to make our smartness stack up over time. Each generation added something, kept a little, passed it on. That's the real trick. Not raw genius in one person's head, but a system that let genius survive past a single lifetime. Think about how much that matters, even now. You didn't invent the alphabet. You didn't invent numbers, or medicine, or the wheel. You inherited them. Every skill you use today was built by people who died long before you were born. That habit, passing knowledge forward instead of losing it, might be the real difference between us and the other human species we shared the planet with. There's another piece of evidence worth mentioning. Around 100,000 years ago in a cave in South Africa called Blombos, someone sat down with a piece of ochre and scratched a pattern into it. Cross-hatched lines, repeated carefully. It's one of the oldest drawings ever found. Nobody knows what it meant. Maybe nothing more than doodling. Maybe it meant everything, some symbol tied to a story, a belief, a person's name. We'll never know. But the fact that someone made it, thousands of generations before writing existed, tells you something. The urge to make meaning out of nothing was already there, buried deep, waiting for the right conditions to bloom into full culture. That's the strange part of being human when you really sit with it. Our species carried the seed of art and imagination for a long stretch of time before it actually flowered. The brain was ready long before the world gave it the reason, or the room, to show what it could do. So when you picture early Homo sapiens, don't picture some sudden burst of genius, all at once, at one lucky moment. Picture something slower, a long fuse. Bodies built for endurance, brains built for connection. Small groups scattered across Africa, surviving, moving, adapting. And somewhere in that slow burn, something clicked, and the fuse finally reached the fire. We don't know the exact moment it happened. We probably never will, but we know what came out the other side. Cave art, music, burial rituals, trade routes stretching hundreds of miles, all of it built by people who look just like you, thinking in ways that, for the first time, we can actually recognize as familiar. We were one of four, just one. But we were the one that figured out how to remember, and that, more than muscle or bone or brain size, might be the real reason you're the one listening to this story tonight, instead of someone else entirely. Now let's turn to the relatives who were here long before us. The ones who lived through ice ages we can barely imagine. The Neanderthals. Neanderthals get a bad reputation. Say the word and most people picture a dumb, hunched-over caveman grunting his way through life. Forget that image. Throw it out. It's wrong, and the real story is a lot stranger and a lot sadder than the cartoon version. Let's start with the body, because Neanderthals were built like nobody alive today. Short and thick. Barrel chests, strong arms. Their bones were dense, heavier than ours, built to handle serious force. Some researchers think a Neanderthal could out-wrestle most modern humans without much effort. That wasn't an accident. It was an adaptation. They lived through brutal cold, ice ages that turned Europe into frozen tundra, and their bodies were furnaces built to survive it. Their faces looked different too. Big noses, which some scientists think helped warm freezing air before it hit their lungs, heavy brow ridges over the eyes, a face that pushed forward slightly instead of tucking back under the skull like ours does. If you saw one walking toward you on a dark street, you'd notice something was off, but you might not be able to say what. Here's the detail that surprises people most. Neanderthal brains were big, not slightly big, often bigger than ours. On average, their brains measured a little larger in raw size than a modern human brain. For decades, that fact confused scientists. Bigger brain, but supposedly less intelligent. That never added up. And the more research piles up, the more that old assumption looks flat out wrong. Neanderthals lived across a huge stretch of land, from Portugal all the way to Siberia. That's an enormous range covering forests, mountains, and freezing plains. And they didn't just survive there, they thrived there. For a very long stretch of time. Some estimates put their presence in Europe at over 300,000 years. That's longer than our own species has existed as a distinct group. Let that sink in for a second. The primitive cousin outlasted us, at least so far by a wide margin. Now let's talk about what they actually did, because the evidence keeps getting more impressive the deeper you dig. Neanderthals made tools, good ones, a style called Mousterian tools, sharp flakes struck off a stone core with real skill. Not fancy by later standards, but effective, and made with real technique passed down carefully. They hunted big animals, mammoths, woolly rhinos, bison the size of small cars. Taking down an animal like that with a wooden spear takes nerve, teamwork, and a plan. You don't do that by accident. They used fire, not just for warmth, but for cooking. Burnt bones and charred plant matter show up again and again at Neanderthal sites. Some evidence even suggests they cooked starchy vegetables, softening them to make them easier to eat and digest. That's not survival by luck. That's know-how, tested and refined. Here's where it gets more interesting and honestly more moving. Neanderthals buried their dead. At a site in France called La Chapelle-aux-Saints, archaeologists found a skeleton curled in a shallow pit, positioned carefully, almost like someone laid him down to rest. At Shanidar Cave in Iraq, researchers found Neanderthal remains surrounded by clusters of pollen. For years, some scientists argued this meant Neanderthals buried their dead with flowers. That specific claim is debated now. Some think the pollen came from burrowing rodents, not human hands. But even without the flowers, the burial itself tells you something. These weren't bodies left to rot where they fell. Someone cared enough to dig a hole, to place the body with intention, to mark the fact that a person had died. Think about what that means. Burial isn't just about hygiene. It's a sign of thinking beyond the present moment, a sign of grief, maybe even a sign of belief in something after death. We can't know what was going on in a Neanderthal's mind as they stood over a grave. But the act itself says they had minds capable of standing there in the first place. There's more. In a Spanish cave called Cueva de los Aviones, researchers found seashells that had been pierced and painted with pigment, likely worn as jewellery. That site dates back over 100,000 years, long before modern humans arrived in that part of Europe. Neanderthals made that. Neanderthals wore that. Someone decided a painted shell was worth stringing onto a cord and wearing around their neck. That's not survival instinct. That's style. That's identity. At another cave in France, Bruniquel Cave, deep underground, far from any daylight, researchers found strange ring structures built from broken stalagmites. They date back around 176,000 years. That's tens of thousands of years before modern humans ever showed up in Europe. Whoever built those rings had to bring fire deep into a pitch-black cave, break stone with precision, and arrange it in a deliberate pattern, far from shelter, far from any obvious practical use. Nobody knows why they built it. A ritual space, a meeting point. We may never know. But someone planned it. Someone carried it out. That takes a working, organised mind. So why did we spend so long assuming Neanderthals were dumb brutes? Part of it comes down to old, biased science. Early Neanderthal skeletons were studied by researchers who assumed, before even looking closely, that they'd find something primitive. One of the first well-known skeletons found in France in the early 1900s actually had arthritis, which bent his spine and joints. The scientists studying him assumed that hunched posture was just how all Neanderthals stood. That mistake got repeated in textbooks and drawings for decades. An old sick man became the face of an entire species. It took a long time to correct that picture. Part of it also comes from us wanting to feel special. If Neanderthals were clearly smart, clearly capable of art and ritual and deep thought, then what made modern humans the ones who survived? What made us different enough to be the last one standing? It's a more comfortable story if the other guy was simple. Less comfortable if the other guy was almost exactly like you. And here's the part that really changes the whole picture. Neanderthals aren't fully gone. Not in the way people usually think. If your ancestors came from outside Africa, there's a good chance you're carrying Neanderthal DNA right now. Around 2% of the genetic code in most non-African populations traces back to Neanderthals. That's from real encounters, real relationships. Somewhere, tens of thousands of years ago, Neanderthals and modern humans met, and in some cases had children together. Those children survived, grew up, had children of their own, and piece by piece some small part of the Neanderthal genetic line got folded into ours. That DNA isn't just leftover trivia, it's active. Some of it affects how your immune system responds to certain diseases. Some of it may affect skin tone, or how well you handle cold weather. Some Neanderthal genes are even linked to things like sleep patterns and mood. There's a decent chance that some quirk in your own body, right now as you're lying there listening to this, traces back to a Neanderthal ancestor from deep in the Ice Age. So they didn't vanish completely. They faded as a separate group, sometime around 40,000 years ago. The exact reasons are still debated. Climate shifts, competition for food, small population sizes that made them vulnerable to bad luck, disease and slow decline. Possibly conflict with modern humans moving into their territory. Probably some mix of all of it, spread out over thousands of years, not one single dramatic ending. But their line didn't end in the way people usually picture extinction. There was no final battle, no last stand. Just a slow blending and a slow fading, until the two groups that had once been separate weren't fully separate anymore. What strikes me most about the Neanderthal story is how long we misjudged them. We had the bones, we had the tools, we even had the graves, and for most of the last century we still managed to get the story wrong, painting them as lesser, simpler, almost like failed drafts of ourselves. They weren't failed drafts, they were survivors, built for one of the harshest environments humans have ever lived through, who buried their dead, wore jewellery, built strange structures underground, and hunted animals bigger than trucks with sharpened wood and raw nerve. They just didn't make it, not fully, not as their own separate branch. But part of them is still here, quietly folded into the genes of billions of people alive today. A strange kind of survival. not through their own descendants carrying their name forward, but through borrowed fragments tucked inside a completely different species that happened to be standing nearby at exactly the right moment in history. Now let's talk about a species we barely knew existed until very recently. No skull, no face, almost no bones at all, just a finger, a tiny piece of their pinky finger, found in a cave in Siberia. That single bone rewrote everything we thought we knew about who else was out there. The cave is called Denisova. It sits in the Altai Mountains in southern Siberia, cold and remote, the kind of place that feels forgotten by the rest of the world. In 2008, researchers digging there found a small bone fragment. It looked like it could belong to almost anyone. A bear. A modern human. Nobody was impressed at first glance. Then they ran the DNA. What came back didn't match anything on record. Not us. Not Neanderthals. Something else. A new branch on the family tree hiding in plain sight, known only through its genetic code. Scientists name this group the Denisovans, after the cave where that first fragment turned up. Here's what makes this discovery so strange. Normally, when scientists identify a new human species, they have a skull to study, a jaw, something with a shape, a face, a set of features you can compare side by side with other species. With the Denisovans, there was almost none of that for years, just a finger bone. Later, a few teeth. Then, much later, part of a jaw found in a completely different location. That's it. That's the entire physical record for a species that once spread across a huge part of Asia. Think about that for a moment. We know Denisovans existed. We know quite a lot about their biology, but we still don't really know what they looked like. No full skull has ever been found. No face to imagine. No reconstruction you'd recognize on sight. They're a species defined almost entirely by genetics, not by bones. That's never happened before in the study of human history. So how do scientists know so much about a species with almost no physical remains? The answer is DNA, and it turns out DNA can tell you an enormous amount, even from a fragment smaller than a fingernail. From that one pinky bone, researchers pulled out a full genetic code, and what they found was remarkable. The Denisovans were a separate group from Neanderthals, even though both branches likely split from a common ancestor a very long time before either group met modern humans. Genetically, they were cousins to Neanderthals, but distinct enough to count as their own group entirely. And they were not some small, isolated population stuck in one cave. Genetic traces of Denisovans show up today in people across a huge stretch of Asia and the Pacific. People from Papua New Guinea carry some of the highest levels of Denisovan DNA in the world today, sometimes reaching 4 to 6% of their genetic code. That's a striking number. It means Denisovans didn't just exist somewhere far off in Siberia and vanish quietly. They spread. They mixed. They left descendants scattered across an entire side of the globe. Here's something else DNA revealed, and this part still surprises researchers. Denisovans carry genes linked to survival in extreme environments. One striking example involves modern Tibetan populations. People living at high altitude in Tibet carry a gene that helps their bodies use oxygen efficiently in thin mountain air. That gene traces directly back to Denisovans. Somewhere in the deep past, a Denisovan and a human ancestor had children, and one of those genetic gifts turned out to be life-saving for people living on mountain plateaus thousands of years later. Think about what that means. A species we can't even picture, a species with no known face, helped shape how some modern humans breathe at high altitude today. That's not a small thing. That's biology working across an enormous span of time, quietly passing along a survival tool from one kind of human to another. The jawbone I mentioned earlier turned up in Tibet itself, in a cave called Baishia Karst Cave, high up on the Tibetan plateau. It sat there for decades before anyone realised what it was. A local monk had actually found it back in 1980 and handed it over to a monastery. It wasn't studied properly until years later, when researchers ran protein analysis on it and confirmed it belonged to a Denisovan. That's an incredible detail. This piece of an ancient human species may have been sitting quietly in a monastery for years before science caught up to what it actually was. That discovery also matters because it shows Denisovans weren't only living in the cold lowlands of Siberia. They were up on the Tibetan plateau too, one of the harshest environments on Earth, thin air, brutal cold, thousands of feet above sea level. If that gene for oxygen efficiency came from Denisovans, it starts to make sense why. They may have adapted to that altitude themselves, long before any human group tried living up there. So picture the range here: cold caves in Siberia, high mountain plateaus in Tibet, and genetic traces reaching all the way to islands in the Pacific. That's an enormous spread for a species we still can't fully picture. Wider in some ways than what we can confirm for Neanderthals, even though Denisovans left behind far fewer physical remains. There's another twist that makes this story even stranger. In 2018, researchers studying a bone fragment from Denisova cave found something nobody expected. The bone belonged to a girl, roughly 13 years old, who had lived around 90,000 years ago. Her DNA showed she was neither fully Denisovan nor fully Neanderthal. She was both. Her mother was a Neanderthal. Her father was a Denisovan. Scientists nicknamed her Denny. She's the only direct first-generation hybrid of two different human species ever found. Not evidence of mixing over generations. Not a trace buried deep in modern DNA. An actual daughter, born from two different kinds of human parents, found in the very same cave where the whole mystery started. Think about what that discovery really means. Two different species of ancient humans, each with their own history, their own bodies, their own ways of surviving the world, met in that cave or somewhere nearby. And they didn't just cross paths. They had a child together. That child grew, at least for a little while, carrying two entire lineages inside her, in a single body, in a single lifetime. It's easy to think of these ancient species as separate boxes. Neanderthals here, Denisovans there, modern humans somewhere else, moving in from Africa. But Denny breaks that picture completely. These groups weren't living in sealed-off worlds. They were overlapping, meeting, sometimes forming families. And here's what really gets me about the Denisovans. We know almost nothing about how they looked, how they spoke, what their daily lives were like, what stories they told around a fire, if they told stories at all. We don't have a face to give them. We don't have a name they called themselves. All we have is a scattering of tiny bones, some ancient proteins, and long strings of genetic code passed down through people living today, most of whom have never heard the word Denisovan in their lives. That's a strange kind of history. A species proven real, proven widespread, proven capable of surviving in brutal conditions and passing on genes that still help people breathe on mountaintops today, and yet almost entirely invisible in the physical record. No sculpture, no cave painting we can confidently connect to them, no skeleton laid out for us to study closely. In a way, the Denisovans are less like a chapter in a history book and more like a signature, a mark left behind without an author's name attached. We can see the results. We can trace the DNA. But the people themselves stay mostly in shadow, known through absence as much as through evidence. Maybe that's fitting in its own quiet way. Not every branch of the human story left behind ruins or bones or grand structures. Some branches left behind something smaller and in some ways stranger. A gene here, a trace there, A single hybrid child whose bones happened to survive long enough for us to find her, tens of millennia later, and finally start asking who her parents really were. Now for the last of the four, and this one is tiny, barely 3 feet tall. Found on an island most people couldn't point to on a map. The island is called Flores. It sits in Indonesia, east of Bali, surrounded by deep water on every side. In 2003, a team of archaeologists digging in a cave called Liang Bua found something that made no sense. A skeleton, small, almost childlike. But the teeth were worn down like an adult's. The bones weren't a kid's bones at all. They kept digging. They found more. Eventually they had parts of at least 9 individuals, all small, all with the same strange mix of features, and the skull, when they measured it, held a brain about the size of a grapefruit, roughly a third the size of yours. Scientists gave this new species a name, Homo floresiensis, but almost everyone just calls them the hobbits. You can guess why. Tiny bodies, big feet, living in isolation on a remote island, hidden from the rest of the world for who knows how long. Here's where it gets strange. These weren't some early primitive ancestor lost in deep time. The most recent bones date to around 50,000 years ago. That means these small humans were alive at the same time as us, at the same time as Neanderthals, at the same time as Denisovans, 4 different kinds of human, all breathing on the same planet, and one of them stood about 3.5 feet tall with a brain smaller than a chimpanzee's. Let that sit for a moment. A brain a third the size of ours, and yet right next to those bones the team found stone tools, sharp, deliberately shaped, good enough to butcher animals and cut through plant material, small brain, real tools. That combination broke a rule scientists had trusted for decades. The rule said brain size and tool making go together. Bigger brain, better tools. The hobbits didn't play by that rule at all. So how did a species end up this small in the first place? The leading idea is something called island dwarfism. It's a real pattern seen again and again in nature, not just with humans. Put a population on a small island, cut off from the mainland, and strange things start happening over generations. Food is limited, predators are often few or missing entirely. Big bodies need a lot of fuel, and fuel is scarce on a small island. So smaller bodies get an advantage. They survive better, they eat less. They pass on their genes more successfully than bigger bodies do. Over enough generations, the whole population shrinks. It's happened with elephants on Mediterranean islands, some no bigger than large pigs by the time they finish shrinking. It's happened with deer, with hippos. Islands seem to have this strange rule written into them. Get small, or don't survive. Flores may have done the exact same thing to an early human population. Some researchers think the ancestors of the hobbits were a species called Homo erectus, a much larger, more widespread species that had already made it out of Africa and across parts of Asia long before modern humans existed. If a group of Homo erectus reached Flores and got stuck there, cut off by open water on every side, dwarfism could explain the shrinking. Generation after generation, smaller bodies won. Eventually you end up with something like the Hobbit, but not every scientist agrees with that story. There's another theory, and it's a strange one. Some researchers think the hobbits might not be a shrunk-down version of Homo erectus at all. They think this species may have branched off much earlier, from something even more ancient and more primitive, long before Homo erectus even existed. Under this idea, the small brain isn't a side effect of shrinking. It's just what the original ancestor already looked like, before it ever reached Flores. The debate hasn't been settled, and that's honestly one of the more interesting parts of this whole mystery. We have real bones, real tools, real dates, and scientists still can't agree on where exactly this species came from. Now think about what life on that island might have actually looked like. Flores wasn't some quiet, safe paradise. Alongside the hobbit bones, researchers found the remains of a creature you wouldn't expect, a giant stork, tall enough to loom over a person that size, and something even stranger, Komodo dragons. Yes, those Komodo dragons, the giant lizards that still live in that part of Indonesia today. Only back then, they may have been sharing the same ground as a human standing about 3.5 feet tall. Picture that scene for a second. A creature barely taller than a modern 8-year-old, walking through island forest, carrying a stone tool, while giant lizards move through the same undergrowth. That's not a scene from a fantasy story. That's an actual reconstruction based on real fossils, found layered together in the same cave sediment. There's also evidence of fire use at the site, and signs the hobbits may have hunted a now extinct type of small elephant that once lived on the island. A tiny human hunting a small elephant while dodging giant lizards and enormous storks. Flores must have been one of the strangest ecosystems that ever existed anywhere on Earth. For years, this species stood completely alone in the story of ancient humans. One island, one cave, 9 skeletons, no trace of anything like them anywhere else on the planet. Then, in 2019, researchers working on a different Indonesian island, called Luzon in the Philippines, found something eerily familiar. Small bones, strange proportions, curved toe bones that looked almost more ape-like than human. They named this species Homo luzonensis. Suddenly the hobbit wasn't alone anymore. It looked like island dwarfism, or something very much like it. Might have happened more than once on more than one island, completely independent of each other. Different islands, different time periods, similar outcome, small bodies, isolated by water, evolving along their own private path, cut off from every other human population on Earth. That raises a bigger question. How many of these small, isolated human populations existed and simply left no trace at all? Islands are hard places to excavate. Caves collapse. Bones dissolve in the wrong soil conditions. Entire populations could have lived and died on some forgotten island, and we would never know they existed. The hobbits and their Luzon cousins might just be the ones we got lucky enough to find. Here's what really strikes me about the hobbits. For most of human history, we've told ourselves a simple story. Bigger brains, smarter tools, a straight line upward, always moving towards something more advanced. The hobbits break that story completely. They lived successfully, on their own terms, for tens of generations, maybe longer, with a brain a fraction of the size of ours. They made tools that worked. They hunted animals bigger than themselves. They found a way to survive in a strange, dangerous place, and they did it long after our own species had already spread across most of the globe. Evolution doesn't move in one direction. It doesn't always build towards something bigger or smarter. Sometimes it shrinks things down. Sometimes it finds a completely different solution to the exact same problem. How to survive in a hard place, with limited food, using whatever body you happen to have. 4 human species, now fully introduced. Us, the Neanderthals, the Denisovans, known mostly through DNA, and the hobbits of Flores, small enough to make you rethink everything you assumed about what a human being has to look like. Each one found its own way to survive. Each one adapted to a different corner of the world, using a different set of tools, a different body, a different kind of mind. None of them were lesser versions of us. They were their own complete answers to the same ancient question every living thing eventually has to face. How do you make it through another day on this planet? So now we know there were 4 kinds of humans sharing this planet, all at the same time. But the wildest part, they didn't just exist side by side. There's clear evidence they actually met each other. They crossed paths. Sometimes they lived near each other for generations. They even had children together. Let's start with the DNA. That's where most of the best clues come from. When scientists looked at the genes of people living today, they found something nobody expected. In Europe and Asia, every person tested, literally billions of people, has a tiny bit of Neanderthal DNA. Not just a little either. It's about 1.5% to 2% of every non-African person's whole genetic code. That means somewhere way back in your family tree there was a real Neanderthal. Not just once either. It must have happened more than once, over many generations. This isn't just guesswork. It's written right in our bodies. Every time you get a cold and your immune system fights back, you might be using a tiny genetic trick borrowed from your Neanderthal ancestors. Some genes that help with fighting sickness, handling cold weather, and even the way you feel pain. These have all been traced to Neanderthal roots. You can check this in your own DNA if you do one of those genetic tests. The company will send you a report. It might say something like, you have 1.9% Neanderthal DNA, and then list a few traits you inherited. Now, here's what's even stranger. People from East Asia and Oceania, places like China, Japan, Papua New Guinea and Australia, have DNA from another human species too. That's the Denisovans. Some people in these places have up to 5% Denisovan DNA. That's even more than the Neanderthal bits. It's not evenly spread either. The highest amount shows up in some indigenous groups in Australia and the islands of Papua New Guinea. Again, this isn't just a random thing. Those Denisovan genes help people survive in tough environments. For example, the people who live high up in the mountains of Tibet have a special version of a gene that lets them breathe easier in thin air. Scientists have checked, and that exact version comes from Denisovans. So, thousands of years ago, a Denisovan and a modern human had a child. That child survived and passed on this useful gene. Now, people living on the roof of the world can handle the thin air better than almost anyone else. It's not just about survival, though. Some of these genes affect the way our bodies handle sunlight, or process certain foods, or react to disease. You're carrying a little bit of that ancient history every day, whether you realize it or not. So, what does that mean for how these groups live together? They must have met. They didn't just fight or run from each other. They mixed. They built families. Sometimes they probably lived side by side for years, maybe in the same valley or hunting area. Let's zoom in on a real example. In a cave in Siberia called Denisova, scientists got extremely lucky. They found the bones of a young girl. They ran her DNA, and what they discovered shocked everyone. Her mother was a Neanderthal, her father was a Denisovan. She was a hybrid, a mix of both. This isn't some maybe or possibly. The DNA is clear as day. One parent from one species, one from another. This means they weren't just meeting once in a while. There were times and places where they lived close enough to form families. Other clues come from bones and tools left behind. In Europe, archaeologists have found sites where Neanderthal and modern human artifacts are layered right on top of each other. In some cases, you can see the change almost year by year. One layer is all Neanderthal tools, the next is a jumble, and above that it's mostly modern human stuff. It looks like the groups were sharing space, trading ideas, maybe even swapping tool designs. In France, there's a cave called Grotte du Renne. A team found jewellery and decorated bone tools that look like things made by modern humans. But the bones buried with them belonged to Neanderthals. For a long time, scientists argued about what this meant. Did Neanderthals make the jewellery themselves? Did they copy it from modern humans? Or were the groups trading, sharing ideas, even swapping goods? It's hard to say for sure, but the evidence leans toward real mixing, sometimes even copying each other's inventions. There's more. In Spain, a cave called El Cedron held a tragic secret. Archaeologists found the remains of 12 Neanderthals, all from the same extended family group. When they checked the DNA, they found hints of inbreeding and a lot of genetic diversity missing. But what's interesting is how close this group lived to places where modern human remains have also been found, dated to almost the same time period. These two groups probably knew about each other. Maybe they shared hunting grounds or met at rivers and waterholes. It's not hard to picture them watching each other, sometimes with fear, sometimes with curiosity. But what about the other two species? Did Denisovans and hobbits ever meet? This part is trickier because the evidence is thin. Denisovans lived mostly in Asia, and the hobbits were stuck on islands in Indonesia. The distances are big, but not impossible. Some researchers think Denisovans might have had the skills to cross water, at least short distances. If so, there's a chance some Denisovans made it far enough south to meet small-bodied humans like the hobbits. But right now, there's no direct proof, no bones found together, no DNA shared between those two groups. Still, the fact that Denisovan DNA shows up in modern people from Southeast Asia and Oceania hints at something interesting. Maybe their paths crossed at some point, even if the details are lost to time. Now let's talk about tools. Tools are a kind of language, in a way. When two groups live near each other for long enough, their tools start to look similar. That's what happened between Neanderthals and modern humans in Europe and the Middle East. You see Neanderthal tools that suddenly get more complex. Decorations appear. New shapes and ways of making things show up, sometimes right after modern humans arrive in the same region. Some scientists think this is proof of copying. Others think it's just a case of both groups facing the same problems, so they come up with similar answers, but the timing is suspicious. New, more advanced tools appear just as modern humans show up. It looks a lot like learning by watching. There's even a word for this: cultural diffusion. It means ideas travel from one group to another, even if the groups don't mix much in person. Maybe they traded, or watched each other from a distance. Maybe someone was captured or wandered into a new camp and showed off a better way to make a spear point. However it happened, the result is the same. Styles spread. The pace of change speeds up. New ideas pop up in places far apart. Art is another clue. The earliest cave art in Europe, those famous handprints and animal paintings, shows up after modern humans arrive. But there are hints that Neanderthals might have tried something similar. In a few Spanish caves, researchers have found red pigment, maybe ochre, daubed on cave walls and even on seashells. Some of these are at least 64,000 years old, which is before modern humans were supposed to be in that area. Nobody's found a Neanderthal Mona Lisa, but the signs are there. Maybe they saw what modern humans were doing and decided to try it. Or maybe both groups were experimenting, and we just haven't found the best examples yet. There's even evidence of jewellery. Simple things like pierced animal teeth, shells with holes drilled in them, and beads made from bones. Some were found with human remains, some with Neanderthal skeletons. It's not always clear who made what, but the pattern is real. As different human groups mixed and met, new types of decoration appeared. Maybe it was a way to show who belonged to which group. Maybe it was a fashion trend, or maybe it helped people spot friends and strangers from far away. Let's not forget about the Denisovans. Even though we have almost no bones, their DNA is a goldmine. Some Denisovan genes help modern people fight off viruses. Others help with how bodies handle fat and sugar. Some even affect the shape of your face or the way your teeth fit together. This is real evidence that Denisovans mixed with modern humans, and the results are still visible in people alive right now. What about language? Nobody can say what any of these groups sounded like, but the shape of Neanderthal throat bones and the inside of their skulls suggests they could talk. Maybe not exactly like us, but close. If they could speak and they met modern humans, maybe they picked up new words. Maybe they swapped stories. That's one of the biggest mysteries, how much they understood each other, not just with tools or genes, but with real conversations. Now think about what this all means. The old idea was that modern humans replaced the other groups, just showed up, pushed them out, and took over. But the evidence says it wasn't so simple. There was mixing, there was sharing. For thousands of years, these different groups were neighbours. Sometimes they fought. Sometimes they copied each other. Sometimes they had children. The lines between groups got blurry. There's a site in Romania called Peștera cu Oase, literally cave with bones. In it, scientists found a skull and jaw belonging to an early modern human. When they checked the DNA, they found something wild. This person had a recent Neanderthal ancestor, maybe only 4 to 6 generations back. That's not some ancient event. That's a great-great-grandparent. It means that in some places the mixing was close and recent. The family trees tangled together. On the other side of the world, in the islands north of Australia, the story gets even more tangled. Modern indigenous Australians and people from Papua New Guinea have the highest levels of Denisovan DNA found anywhere. This suggests their ancestors met Denisovans on their way south, probably somewhere in Southeast Asia. Again, not just once. It looks like there were at least 2, maybe 3 separate times when Denisovan and modern human ancestors mixed. Each meeting left a different genetic fingerprint in today's people. Let's look at what this means in simple terms. You could line up the family trees of people from Europe, Asia, and the Pacific. You'd see branches twisting together. You'd see Neanderthals joining in more than once. You'd see Denisovan lines coming in at different times in different places. It's not a neat, clean picture. It's a messy tangle, and that tells us something big. The ancient world was never simple. Borders changed, groups moved around, people met, sometimes peacefully, sometimes not. They shared, they fought, they mixed. Genes, ideas, and even diseases passed back and forth. Here's one of the strangest twists. The Neanderthal DNA in modern humans isn't all the same. It's different in people from Europe, China, and the Middle East. This means modern humans didn't just meet Neanderthals once. They met them again and again in different places, over thousands of years. Each time, some DNA got mixed in. It's like patchwork, with different patterns in different regions. That's why your Neanderthal bits might not match your friends, even if you're both from the same country. Some people ask, did these groups ever live in the same village? Did they share fires, tell stories, raise children together? We'll probably never have a perfect answer. But the signs are there. Shared tools, mixed genes, art that appears in both groups, hybrid skeletons with traits from both parents. This wasn't a world with sharp lines. It was a world full of meeting points. Even the hobbits might have played a part, though that story is harder to trace. Some scientists wonder if their isolation was ever broken. Did a shipwreck or a wandering group of Denisovans or modern humans ever reach Flores and meet the hobbits? The evidence is missing for now, but the world was full of surprises. It's not impossible. The pattern is clear, though. Every time different human groups met, something changed. DNA got shared. Ideas spread. Sometimes whole ways of life shifted after these meetings. The world grew more complex every time 2 groups came together. That's what makes this story so rich. It's not just about bones and tools. It's about families, about neighbours, about the way people learn from each other even when they don't look the same or speak the same language. It's about how survival sometimes means borrowing, copying or mixing with someone new. And maybe that's the real secret to our own survival. We're the only ones left, but our story is full of other voices. Every person alive today carries echoes of those old meetings, genes shaped by ancient encounters, ideas passed down through countless generations, habits that started long before anyone wrote them down. So next time you hear someone say we're all the same, or that the past was simple, remember this. The world was always mixed. Humans have always met, blended, and changed each other. Our family tree is full of old branches, some still growing inside us, some lost but not forgotten. Yet despite all this mixing, one by one, Every kind but ours vanished. So how did it happen? How did these different branches, Neanderthals, Denisovans, the hobbits, and our own kind, slowly disappear until only one was left? It didn't happen all at once. It wasn't a sudden disaster, like a meteor or a giant volcano. It was slower, quieter, and in some ways even more mysterious. It's like watching a big old tree. You see the small branches dry up first. Some snap in a storm. Some just shrink away over years. By the time you notice the main trunk is alone, the rest is already gone. Let's look at the evidence, piece by piece. Archaeologists and scientists have spent years trying to figure out where, when, and sometimes even why these other humans vanished. They dig up bones, study ancient pollen, look at marks on teeth, and even check the dirt for clues about the weather. It's a puzzle with missing pieces, but each clue tells us a bit more. Start with the hobbits. This is probably the easiest case just because of where they lived. Flores is a small, isolated island in Indonesia. There's deep water on all sides. You can't walk there, even when the sea levels were much lower than today. The hobbits lived there for a long time, at least 60,000 years ago, and maybe even earlier. Their tools and bones appear in layers of dirt that can be dated with pretty good accuracy. But then, at some point after 50,000 years ago, the signs of hobbit life stop. No more bones, no more stone tools in the layers above. It's as if they all quietly left the stage. What happened? Some scientists think a big volcanic eruption might have played a part. There is a thick layer of ash that covers parts of the island, dating to around the same time the hobbits disappear. That could have wiped out their food, poisoned the water, or just made it too hard to survive. But there's another idea. Around the same time, modern humans start showing up in the region. Not right on Flores, but on nearby islands. Modern human stone tools appear on Timor, Sulawesi, and even Australia, all dated to about 50,000 years ago. It's possible that our kind, spreading out from Asia, eventually made it to Flores. Maybe the two groups never met. Maybe modern humans brought new diseases, or hunted the same animals, or just changed the landscape in ways the hobbits couldn't handle. Or maybe they did meet, and the smaller, isolated hobbits just couldn't compete. The island was small. There wasn't much room to hide or move away. The record just goes silent after that. Now, let's talk about the Denisovans. Here the story gets murkier. We have almost no bones, just a few teeth, a finger bone, and a piece of skull. Most of what we know comes from DNA. We know Denisovans lived in Siberia because that's where their bones were found, but their genetic fingerprint shows up far to the south, in places like the Philippines, Indonesia, and even Australia. That means they must have spread out over a huge area. But then their trail ends. In Siberia, there's a gap in the layers of dirt where Denisovan DNA shows up. After about 50,000 years ago, nothing. The bones stop. The DNA in animals and humans found later doesn't match. In Southeast Asia, the story is even harder to pin down. There are no caves with clear Denisovan bones. Their DNA survives in some people, but not the bones themselves. It's like they faded into the background. Why? Some clues point to changing weather. Around 45,000 years ago, the world's climate went through wild swings. Sometimes it was cold and dry, then suddenly warm and wet. Forests turned into grasslands, then flipped back again. For a group like the Denisovans, who may have lived in forests and hunted big animals, that kind of change could be a disaster. Their favourite food might vanish. Their shelters might be flooded or burned by fire. But there's another piece. Modern humans were spreading everywhere by this point. We had better tools, maybe better ways to hunt and share food, and possibly bigger groups. If Denisovans and modern humans competed for the same animals or shelter, the Denisovans might have slowly lost out. Some may have joined modern human groups, leaving only their DNA behind. Others may have moved further into hard-to-reach places, shrinking their numbers until they were gone. Let's look at Neanderthals. This is where the evidence is the strongest, but also the most heartbreaking. Neanderthals lived in Europe and Western Asia for a long time, over 300,000 years. They survived ice ages and warm spells, hunted mammoths and deer, made tools and cared for their sick and old. But something changed about 40,000 years ago. The first sign is their bones. There are a few late Neanderthal skeletons, but after 39,000 years ago, the record is nearly empty. The last known Neanderthal sites are in Spain and Gibraltar. After that, nothing. Their tools disappear too. In some places, you can see the transition. Neanderthal tools get mixed with modern human tools, then only modern human styles survive. What caused this? There are a few main ideas, each with some evidence behind it. One idea is competition. Modern humans arrived in Europe around 45,000 years ago. They brought new tools, new hunting methods, and possibly bigger groups. If you have two similar species hunting the same animals, living in the same caves, and even using the same water, it's hard for both to survive. The group with the edge, maybe faster runners, maybe better weapons, maybe just bigger numbers, slowly pushes out the other. But there's more. The weather was changing fast. The last ice age was at its worst. Temperatures dropped, forests shrank, open grasslands spread out, and food got scarce. Some studies show that Neanderthal numbers were already dropping before modern humans arrived. They might have been living in small, scattered groups. Less contact means less sharing of ideas, less help in hard times, and more inbreeding. DNA from late Neanderthal bones shows signs of this. Less variety, more signs of sickness and stress. Another clue comes from bones of animals hunted by Neanderthals. There's a shift in what they ate. Early on, Neanderthals hunted big animals, mammoths, bison, deer. Later, they started eating more rabbits, birds, and even turtles. These animals are harder to catch and don't provide as much meat. It suggests their world was shrinking. Maybe the big herds were gone, or maybe they were pushed out by new hunters, modern humans. Disease is another theory. When two groups who've been apart for a long time meet, they can pass germs to each other. The group with less resistance can get sick very quickly. Some researchers think modern humans brought new diseases into Europe that Neanderthals just couldn't fight off. The evidence isn't as clear, but it's possible. And then there's the most basic reason: numbers. If you have a small population, even a few bad years can wipe you out. Say a harsh winter hits. Food is scarce. Just a couple of groups starve or move away, and suddenly there aren't enough left to keep the population going. Over time, the group shrinks, and eventually it disappears. There are also signs from the bones themselves. Late Neanderthal skeletons show more injuries and signs of stress. Some have broken bones that healed badly, or teeth worn down to the roots. It looks like life was getting harder. At the same time, modern human skeletons show signs of better diets, more varied food, and sometimes even small bits of jewellery or tools buried with them. It's a contrast. One group fading, while another is just getting started. But even as Neanderthals vanished, they left traces behind. Not just in DNA, but in the land itself. Some of the last places Neanderthals lived, like the rocky cliffs of Gibraltar, are wild, windswept places. Archaeologists have found bits of charcoal, broken tools, and even footprints in ancient mud. It's easy to picture a small group huddled around a fire watching the sea, not knowing they're among the last of their kind. So, what about us? Why did our branch survive while the others faded away? The answer isn't simple, but the evidence gives us a few hints. First, modern humans seem to have been better at making connections. Our tools changed faster, and our art spread quickly from place to place. We traded things over long distances, shells, pigments, and maybe even stories. This kind of sharing helps groups survive hard times. If one group has a bad year, they can get help from neighbours. Neanderthals and Denisovans seem to have lived in smaller scattered groups, with less contact between distant families. Second, modern humans may have been better at adapting to change. When the weather shifted, we found new food. When big animals disappeared, we fished, gathered plants, or hunted smaller game. Our technology changed quickly. New spear points, better clothing, even needles for sewing hides together. This ability to switch gears is a powerful survival tool. Third, and maybe most important, is group size. The evidence shows that modern human groups were often larger than Neanderthal or Denisovan bands. Bigger groups mean more ideas, more helpers, and more chances for children to survive. It also helps avoid the problems of inbreeding, which can weaken a small population over time. But here's something that really stands out. Even as other human groups faded, sometimes their genes lived on inside us. Each time a modern human and a Neanderthal or Denisovan had a child, that was a tiny victory over extinction. Some part of that other branch survived, passed down, hidden in our blood, showing up in little ways even now. It's easy to look at this as a story of winners and losers, but nature isn't about who's better. Sometimes it's just about being in the right place at the right time. A dry year here, a cold snap there, a lucky birth, or a tragic accident. Any of these could tip the balance. The world was changing fast and not every branch could keep up. There's another side to this story, the silence. For each group that vanished, there's a last footprint, a last fire, a last child, and then nothing. No more tools in the dirt, no more bones, just empty layers waiting to be found thousands of years later. Sometimes that silence is the loudest clue of all. Some people ask, is there a lesson here? Maybe it's about how fragile things can be. Or maybe it's a reminder of how much we owe to luck, to change, and to the people who came before us. We didn't win because we were stronger, or smarter, or more deserving. We just survived. And yet the evidence is everywhere. DNA in our cells, ancient tools buried in dirt, art scratched on the walls of caves, the shadows of other humans, walking beside us until one by one they faded away. So next time you look in the mirror, remember this. You're not just looking at yourself, you're seeing a long tangled story, a story full of twists, near misses, and old echoes. You carry the traces of lost cousins, old friends, and maybe even a bit of mystery that will never be solved. Ask yourself, what really happened to them? Did they just fade away, or did parts of them survive inside us? The evidence is scattered, but it all points to the same strange truth. Once we were not alone, now we're the last branch left. Let's look at what the evidence really tells us. Bones, tools, DNA, and the quiet spaces in between. This is how we know who vanished and how. Each clue is a whisper from the past telling us a little more. But the final answer, the real why, may always be just out of reach. And maybe that's what keeps us searching. So, let's dig into this idea of competition. Was it really the main reason the others vanished? Or is it just the easier story to tell because it feels familiar? After all, when you look at how animals live today, competition is everywhere. Lions and hyenas fight over the same zebra. Wolves push out coyotes. In the wild, when two species want the same thing and live in the same place, it doesn't usually end with both thriving. One wins, the other fades. That's what a lot of people think happened with humans too. But let's slow down and really look at the details. Imagine Europe and Asia about 45,000 years ago. It's cold. There are huge stretches of open land dotted with forests and rivers. Mammoths and woolly rhinos roam across icy plains. In some places there are small family groups of Neanderthals huddling in caves or building shelters. In others, new groups of modern humans, our people, are moving in from the south and east. Both groups hunt, gather wild plants, and build fires in the same kinds of places. If you were to walk into this world, you might not notice much difference at first. Both groups use stone tools. Both wear animal skins for warmth. Both live in small groups, mostly made up of close relatives. But underneath, there are differences. Modern human tools are changing fast. New shapes, new ways to attach stone points to sticks, even small blades for cutting or scraping. Neanderthals use older styles, which worked for a long time but didn't change much. Now, the question is, when these groups bumped into each other, what happened? Did they fight? Did they avoid each other? Or did they sometimes trade, share, or even join up? The truth is, nobody knows exactly how it played out. There probably wasn't just one pattern. In some places, maybe there was violence. In others, people might have traded or even lived side by side for a while. But here's the thing. The record left in the dirt does show that, over time, Neanderthals' tools and bones disappear and modern human ones take over. In some caves, you can see the layers stack up. Neanderthal remains on the bottom, then a thin line where both types of tools show up together, then only modern human tools from then on. It's not a sharp line, like someone flipping a switch. It's more like a slow fade. So, was it just a numbers game? Did modern humans simply outnumber Neanderthals, using up the food and space until the older group had nowhere left to go? Maybe. Studies of ancient pollen and animal bones show that climates were changing fast. Food supplies shifted. If two groups needed the same animals or plants, the bigger group could push the smaller one out, even without a single fight. Just more mouths to feed, more hands to gather, more eyes to spot danger. But it wasn't just about numbers. Some scientists think modern humans had better social networks. Our ancestors traded shells and pigments over long distances, which means they knew how to make friends outside their family. Bigger, better connected groups can survive disasters because they can get help from far away. If a cold year wiped out the mammoths in one valley, people could move or trade for food elsewhere. Neanderthals, on the other hand, seem to have lived in smaller, more scattered bands, less backup if things went wrong. There's also the question of new ideas. Modern humans probably shared stories, songs, and maybe even beliefs. We know this because cave art and carved objects start to show up in Europe right after modern humans arrive. That might mean more than just fun or art. It could mean better ways to pass down skills, how to hunt, how to make a better spear, how to find food in a tough season. If your group can learn faster, you have an edge. So, is this just competition? Not in the way we usually picture it. It wasn't always a fight. It was often about who could deal with change better, who could make more friends, who could find new ways to survive. Sometimes competition is silent. It's about which group can handle the next bad year, which group can hold on just a little longer. Let's look at a few real examples. In France, there's a site called Grotte du Renne. Archaeologists found tools from both Neanderthals and modern humans in the same layers. Some of the Neanderthal tools look like they were copied from modern human designs. There are even tiny beads and pendants that look a lot like modern human jewellery. So, did Neanderthals pick up these new ideas from their neighbours? Maybe they were trying to keep up. Maybe they traded. Or maybe they just saw something new and thought, that's smart, let's try it. But the record shows that even when Neanderthals borrowed new tricks, they still vanished in the end. In the Middle East, things are even more mixed. For a while, Neanderthals and modern humans lived in the same areas. Some caves have remains from both groups, just separated by a few layers of dirt. It looks like they may have taken turns living in the same spots. Maybe one group moved in when the other left, or maybe there was a bit of overlap. But after a while, only modern human bones and tools are left. So, what about fighting? Did modern humans attack Neanderthals and push them out? There isn't much. Direct evidence for big battles. No mass graves, no clear signs of violence. But here and there, some Neanderthal bones show injuries that could be from weapons. A few Neanderthal skulls have holes or cracks, but it's hard to say if those came from humans or just accidents. It's possible there were clashes, but the main picture is one of slow change, not sudden war. There's another kind of competition too. It's about babies. If modern humans had more children who survived, their numbers would grow faster. Neanderthal DNA shows signs that their groups got smaller and more isolated near the end. When a group gets too small, it's harder to find mates, and sickness can spread more easily. Over time, that can make it almost impossible to bounce back from a bad year. But here's a twist. Sometimes, competition leads to mixing instead of fighting. DNA studies have shown that modern humans and Neanderthals had children together more than once. Those children could join either group, or maybe even help connect the two. So, even as Neanderthals faded, some of their genes stuck around. In a way, the story isn't just about one group winning and the other losing. It's about blending too. Let's not forget about the Denisovans. Their story is harder to follow because we have so few bones. But the same patterns show up. Modern humans spread across Asia, and Denisovan DNA pops up in groups from Southeast Asia all the way to Australia. That means there was contact. There might have been competition for land and food, but there was also mixing. Denisovan genes helped people in high mountains survive by making it easier to breathe thin air. That's not just a win or a loss, it's a kind of strange teamwork across species. And what about the hobbits on Flores? Here, competition might have worked in a different way. The island was small, and there wasn't much space or food to go around. When modern humans moved in nearby, the balance could have tipped quickly. Maybe new hunters arrived and caught the same animals the hobbits depended on. Maybe they cut down the forests or set fires that changed the land. Sometimes competition is about who can change the environment fastest. Now, if you step back, you can see this isn't a simple story of strong beats weak. It's a story of small advantages building up over time. Modern humans had more ways to survive change. Maybe we learned faster, shared better, or just got lucky with a few new inventions. Each small edge, better tools, bigger groups, more ways to get food, added up. Over many generations, these little advantages could push the others to the edge. But here's what gets me. It's not just about survival, it's about legacy. The traces of these other humans are still with us. Not just as bones in the dirt, but as bits of DNA, as old tools that someone once shaped and used. We didn't erase them completely. We carry pieces of them wherever we go. There's also a lesson here about how nature works. It's not always fair. It's not always about who's the smartest or the strongest. Sometimes the group that survives is just the group that can handle the next twist. A drought, a cold snap, a flood. Any of these can tip the balance. Even the best hunter can lose his prey when the herds move away. Even the strongest group can shrink if a new disease sweeps through. And remember, competition isn't always obvious. It can be quiet, almost invisible. A family moves to a new valley, they find better hunting, their children survive. Another family doesn't find enough food, and their numbers drop. No battles, no drama, just slow, steady change. So was competition the main reason only one kind of human survived? Maybe. It's a big part of the story, but it's not the whole thing. There's evidence for mixing, for sharing, even for learning from each other. There's also evidence for luck, for sudden changes in weather or food supplies. Sometimes the difference between surviving and vanishing comes down to being in the right place at the right time. Still, it's hard not to see competition at work when you look at the patterns. Modern humans went everywhere. We tried new foods, new tools, new lands. Other groups held on as long as they could, but they couldn't keep up with all the change. Slowly their numbers dropped, their tools vanished, their footprints faded. But even as we think about competition, it's worth remembering that the world was unstable. Weather changed, rivers shifted, forests grew and shrank. The stage itself kept moving. In a way, every group was fighting not just each other, but the world itself. The ice, the storms, the empty bellies, the long winters, these were the real enemies. And then there's the mystery of disease. When new groups move in, they can bring germs that the old groups have never seen. It's happened again and again in history. Sometimes disease spreads faster than any army, but that's a story for the next part. So, as we leave the idea of competition behind, remember this. It's just one piece of a much bigger puzzle. The end of the other humans wasn't just about who won and who lost. It was about change, chance, and the strange ways our stories get tangled together. But competition may not be the whole story. We also have to think about something even smaller and harder to see. Disease. What happens when two kinds of humans meet and one brings along invisible enemies? That's where the story gets even more complicated. So let's get into disease. Not just the kind that knocks you out for a week, but real, world-changing sickness. Most people think about big battles or running out of food when they imagine why groups vanish. But germs can do just as much damage, sometimes even more. The thing about disease is, you don't see it coming. It's invisible. You can't fight it with a spear. It sneaks into your camp, passing from one person to the next before you even realize anyone is sick. Here's the thing. When two groups who've been apart for a long time meet, their bodies are used to different germs. Each group carries bacteria and viruses they've gotten used to over generations. Their immune systems, basically the body's defense team, learn how to fight the germs they see all the time. But if a new type of germ shows up, one their bodies have never faced, that's when real trouble starts. You can see this in history over and over. When Europeans sailed to the Americas, they brought smallpox, measles, and flu. These diseases tore through native communities who'd never faced them before. In some places, 90% of people died, not from war, but from sickness. It happened fast, sometimes in just a few years. Even groups that never saw a single foreigner still got sick, because germs travelled down trade routes. That's how powerful disease can be. So what about back in the Ice Age, when these different humans met? We don't have written records, but the same basic rules would apply. Modern humans leaving Africa would have carried their own set of germs. Neanderthals, Denisovans, and the hobbits would have had their own too. Each group was used to what their bodies grew up with. Now, imagine them meeting for the first time. It's like swapping invisible time bombs. Picture a small family group of Neanderthals living in a cold, damp valley. They've spent years with the same people, sharing fires and food. Their immune systems know how to handle the sicknesses that pass around in their group. But then, a few modern humans show up. Maybe they share a meal or even have children together. Nobody feels sick at first, but the germs start moving from one body to another. Some are harmless. Some, though, are deadly. Scientists can't dig up ancient flu viruses from bones, but they can look for signs. One clue comes from genetics. Modern humans today have bits of DNA that seem to help fight off old viruses. We also see Neanderthal DNA in some of those same spots, especially in genes related to the immune system. This means, way back, there was a kind of silent war going on inside people's bodies. Germs trying to spread, bodies fighting back. Sometimes the only survivors were the ones whose genes gave them an edge. Another clue comes from bones. When you look at ancient skeletons, sometimes you see signs of infection, holes in bone, strange growths or bad teeth. Neanderthal bones sometimes show these marks. There are even cases where the bones show signs of being sick for months or years. That means whatever disease hit them, it didn't always kill fast. It could drag a person down, making them weak, less able to hunt or take care of kids. In a small group, losing just one or two strong adults could be a disaster. There's also the question of numbers. Small groups are more at risk. If a sickness hits a big group, some people will survive and the group can bounce back. But in a tiny group, losing just a few can wipe out the whole family line. Neanderthals, Denisovans, and hobbits all lived in small, spread-out bands. When a new germ hit, they may not have had enough healthy people left to keep going. Now, you might wonder, did modern humans bring all the germs? Not really. It could go both ways. Neanderthals or Denisovans might have had bugs that modern humans weren't ready for too. In the end, though, the group that could handle new diseases better would have had the edge. Let's look at an example. There's a set of genes in modern people that helps fight off viruses. Some of these genes come directly from Neanderthals and Denisovans. Scientists found that people in parts of Asia, especially people living in places like Papua New Guinea, carry a lot of Denisovan DNA in the parts of their immune system. This isn't just a random thing. It looks like thousands of years ago, when modern humans moved into new lands, mixing with Denisovans helped them survive new germs. The genes stuck around because they worked. But not all gene mixing was helpful. Some Neanderthal genes in modern people are linked to higher chances of getting sick from certain viruses today. So sometimes mixing made people stronger, but sometimes it made them more vulnerable. The story isn't simple, it's a trade-off, just like everything else in nature. What about the hobbits on Flores? Their story is even harder to track. The island is small and cut off from everywhere else. That means for a long time they were probably safe from outside germs. But once modern humans landed in the area, things could change fast. Even a single visitor could bring a sickness that spread through the whole population. There are no written records, but the pattern fits. When new people arrive on an island, local species often vanish, not just because of hunting, but because of disease. Let's zoom in on the big picture for a moment. Why does disease hit so hard when groups mix? It all comes down to time. Your immune system learns to fight the germs you grow up with. Over many generations, families pass down genes that help with local bugs. But when a totally new germ shows up, your body has no defense ready. It's like sending in a soccer team to play hockey. Wrong gear, wrong skills. In big cities today, germs spread fast because people are packed together. But back in the Ice Age, groups were spread out. That made outbreaks smaller, but also meant everyone in the band caught the same bug at once. No hospitals, no medicine, just what you could find in the wild. If half your group was too sick to hunt, you might all go hungry. There's another piece to this puzzle. The cold climate in Europe and Asia might have made things worse. Cold, damp caves are great places for some germs to survive. People huddled close for warmth, sharing the same space night after night. If someone got sick, everyone breathed in the same air. That's a recipe for trouble. And here's something strange. Some viruses and bacteria can hide in your body for years. They don't always cause sickness right away. You can feel fine, carry the germ, and spread it to others without knowing. So a healthy-looking person could bring a disease into a new group, and nobody would see the danger until it was too late. But let's not forget, modern humans faced risks too. When we moved into new lands, we met new germs ourselves. Sometimes we got lucky. Sometimes we paid a price. But over time, the groups that survived were the ones who could handle the mix of old and new diseases. Now think about what this means for the big story. Disease doesn't leave dramatic marks like fires or battles. It leaves gaps, empty camps, bones that stop appearing after a certain date, a slow fading out, not a sudden stop. When archaeologists dig, they see the layers change. Fewer bones, fewer tools. Sometimes it's hard to tell if it was hunger, cold, or disease that caused it, but the pattern is there. You might ask, can we ever know for sure? Probably not. The germs that mattered most left almost no trace. They didn't fossilize, they didn't carve marks we can see, but the clues in DNA, the timing of disappearances, and what we know from later history all point to disease as a big part of the puzzle. Let's talk philosophy for a minute. Disease isn't just random bad luck. It's part of how life works. Every group, every species faces challenges from the world they can't see. Our bodies are built from the stories of past sickness, each gene a tiny victory or loss in a battle that never really ends. When you look at your own family tree, there's a good chance your ancestors survived plagues or fevers that wiped out others. That's not just a sad story. It's a story of survival. There's something humbling about this. We like to think we're in control, that we shape the world with our tools and our minds. But sometimes tiny things, so small you need a microscope, change history more than any invention or idea. A single virus, passed in a handshake or a shared meal, can reshape the world. Another angle to think about is how disease shapes culture. If a group is hit hard by sickness, they might learn to avoid strangers or to be careful about sharing food. Some of the old taboos, rules about who you can marry or what you can eat, might have started as ways to avoid getting sick. Over time, groups that found good ways to deal with disease would survive better. That's not just science. It's the roots of culture and tradition, passed down in stories, rules, and habits. Now let's look at one last detail. Sometimes disease doesn't just kill, it weakens. It makes you slower, less able to hunt, or to care for kids or elders. In a tough world, that's all it takes. If your group is already on the edge, maybe the winters are getting colder or food is harder to find, a new sickness can be the thing that tips the balance. It's not dramatic, but it's final. So, when we look at why only one human group survived, disease is a big part of the answer. Not the whole answer, but a piece that's easy to miss. It's the quiet disaster, the one that doesn't leave broken spears or burned shelters, but leaves gaps in the story. And when you add it to everything else, competition, climate, luck, you start to see how fragile survival really was. Even today, you can see the marks, the bits of DNA that help fight off sickness, the old stories about avoiding certain foods or places, the traces of battles fought inside the body, not on the open plain. So, was it just germs that did it? No. But disease played its part right alongside everything else. It's a reminder that history isn't just about heroes and wars. Sometimes the real turning points are quiet, invisible, passed from hand to hand or breath to breath, with nobody even noticing until it's too late. And as we follow this trail, there's one last twist. Some of those other human groups may not have vanished completely. There's a chance their stories didn't end, but changed shape. Maybe they were absorbed, bit by bit, into bigger groups. Maybe their children and grandchildren lived on in new forms, carrying memories and genes into the future. But that's a story for the next part. Not all endings are deaths. Sometimes it's more like a slow melting together. When we picture the end of Neanderthals, Denisovans, or the Hobbits, it's easy to imagine a final day. A cave abandoned, a last lonely campfire. But what if the real story is messier? What if some endings are really just emerging, one group blending into another until you can't separate them anymore? Let's dig into this idea. Imagine two family groups, one Neanderthal, one modern human, living not far apart. Maybe they meet by a river or in a forest clearing. At first, they might be cautious, but over time things change. Maybe they trade tools, maybe someone from one group marries into the other. Slowly the boundaries start to blur. After a few generations, the children don't belong to just one group. They're a mix of both. If you came back 100 years later, you might not be able to tell who started where. This is what scientists call absorption. It's not a sudden event, like a volcano or a flood. It's a gradual process, almost invisible as it happens. The older group doesn't vanish overnight. Instead, its members are slowly folded into the larger growing group. Their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren carry pieces of them forward. Sometimes it's in their faces, their height, the shape of their hands. More often, it's in their DNA, a tiny code that's passed down quietly, hidden in every cell. Here's the thing. We know this happened, at least with Neanderthals and Denisovans. The proof is in our genes. Every person from outside Africa carries a bit of Neanderthal DNA. In some populations, especially in Asia and the islands north of Australia, you also find Denisovan DNA. This didn't happen by accident. It happened because these groups met, mixed, and had children together. That's not a guess. That's written in the code of billions of people alive today. Let's look at how this works. Picture a group of modern humans moving into a new area. They're not alone. There are already Neanderthals living there. Maybe at first there's tension. Maybe they compete for food or shelter. But people are people. Over time, some decide to join forces. Maybe a Neanderthal woman marries a modern human man. Their children inherit a mix of genes from both sides. Geneticists have traced this mixing in surprising detail. For example, you might have a stretch of DNA that helps your skin handle sunlight, or lets your immune system fight off certain germs. In some cases, those stretches come straight from Neanderthals or Denisovans. Scientists can even point to specific genes, like one that affects how your body reacts to certain viruses, or another that helps with fat storage in cold climates. What's wild is that this mixing didn't just happen once. It happened many times, in different places. Each meeting left a different fingerprint. Some groups have more Neanderthal DNA, others more Denisovan. Some parts of the world, like Papua New Guinea, have more Denisovan genes than almost anywhere else. That's because the ancestors of people there mixed with Denisovans, maybe on their way through Southeast Asia. If you break it down, it's kind of like making bread. You start with different flours, each one with its own taste and texture. Mix them together and you get something new. It's not just a blend, it's a whole new loaf, with flavours you wouldn't get from just one kind. That's what happened as these human groups merged. But here's what's really interesting. Not every gene stuck around. Some faded out over time. If a Neanderthal gene made life harder, say, made you more likely to get sick, it usually disappeared after a few generations. But if a gene helped, it spread. That's why some parts of your DNA have more Neanderthal or Denisovan influence than others. Natural selection, the slow, quiet force that shapes all living things, kept what worked and dropped what didn't. Let's look at some examples. There's a gene that helps fight off viruses, called OAS1. Some versions of this gene came from Neanderthals. Today, people with that gene version seem to handle certain viruses better. In another case, Denisovan genes may help Tibetans live at high altitudes, where the air is thin. Without those genes, it would be much harder to survive in the mountains. But it's not all about survival. Some inherited traits are small, even strange. Some Neanderthal genes are linked to hair texture or skin colour. Others might affect how you sleep or how your body reacts to pain. It's a strange thought. Some part of your reaction to the world, from sunlight to sleep, might come from ancient cousins who disappeared long ago. Let's pause a second and think about what this really means. The story of human survival isn't just about who won and who lost. It's about how groups mixed, shared, and changed each other. Absorption isn't defeat. It's a different kind of survival. The genes live on, even if the group doesn't. And it's not just about the big groups like Neanderthals or Denisovans. In some places, there may have been other smaller groups, ones we barely know about. The only clues are bits of DNA that don't match any known group. Scientists call these ghost populations. We don't have their bones. We don't know their names. All we have are hints in the genes of people alive today. It's like finding fingerprints but no face to match them to. Now, let's talk about what absorption looks like in the real world, not just in DNA but in daily life. Imagine a group slowly shrinking year after year. Maybe food gets scarce, or winters get colder. One by one, the young people leave to join a bigger group nearby, maybe looking for better chances or just a safer life. Marriages happen across group lines. Children grow up speaking both languages, learning both sets of stories. If you visited their camp, you might hear a mix of words, see a blend of old and new tools. After a while, the old group isn't separate anymore. Their ways and ideas have mixed into the bigger group. The original language fades, but some words survive. Maybe a song or a way of carving wood lives on in the new mix. The original group is gone, but not erased. They've become part of something bigger. This is how cultures change too. Sometimes it's slow and gentle. Other times it's quick, like when a powerful group arrives with better tools or new ideas, but most often it's a back and forth. People share what works. They hold on to what matters most. If you look at old tools, you sometimes see styles blending together. A Neanderthal hand axe with a modern human twist. A Denisovan necklace with shells from a distant shore. People don't always choose this blending. Sometimes it's just what happens as groups bump into each other, trade or share space. But sometimes it's a way to survive. If your group is small and struggling, joining a bigger, stronger group might be the best option. It's not always easy. Old ways can get lost. But the people themselves don't just disappear, they become part of something new. Let's think about what this means for memory and identity. If you're part of a group that gets absorbed, your traditions might fade, but pieces will stay, hidden in language, in habits, in the way you see the world. Over time, even if nobody remembers the old group's name, their influence sticks around. It's in the food people eat, the stories they tell, the way they build their houses. It's a quiet kind of legacy. One of the most powerful examples of this is language. Words can travel far, even if the people who first spoke them are gone. Some English words, like boar or beach, may come from ancient languages now lost. Maybe even from distant cousins like Neanderthals. We don't know for sure, but it's possible. The same goes for art and music. Sometimes, a pattern or rhythm survives long after the original makers are gone. There's something almost comforting about this. Absorption means loss, but also survival in a new form. It's a reminder that the story of humans is not just about endings, but about change, about how we take in new things, make them ours, and move forward together. But here's another twist. Not every group merged smoothly. Sometimes the blending wasn't equal. The bigger group set the rules. The smaller one had to adapt or risk being left out. Some stories, skills, or beliefs got pushed aside, forgotten for a while. But even then, pieces could survive, hidden, waiting for the right moment to return. Think about food. When new people arrive, they bring new ways of cooking, new plants or animals to eat. Over time, the old and new mix together. The result is a food culture that's richer, more varied. The same thing happens with tools, clothing, even how people treat sickness or birth. Every tradition, everything you do in daily life could have roots in more than one group. You can see this in art too. Cave paintings in France and Spain show animals, people, handprints. Some shapes or styles might have come from Neanderthals, others from modern humans. Some patterns appear in both, hinting at shared ideas, or maybe even shared artists. The lines blur. The art becomes a bridge between groups, proof that they didn't just fight or ignore each other, but shared and learned together. Now, let's step back and look at the bigger picture. The idea of absorption changes how we think about disappearance. It's not always sad or violent. Sometimes it's just the way the world works. Nature likes to mix things up. When things blend, new forms appear. Old ways don't always vanish. They get woven into something larger. Here's what gets me. If you look in the mirror, you might see traces of this story. Maybe it's the colour of your eyes, the way your hair curls, or something hidden deep in your cells. Pieces of Neanderthals, Denisovans, and maybe even groups we've never met are still alive in you, and in everyone you know. The story didn't end. It just changed shape. Absorption isn't just about genes, though. It's about stories, too. When people join together, they share myths, jokes, and memories. Some tales get told and retold, changing a little each time. Over centuries, the details blur, but the heart of the story remains. Even today, some old legends might go back to those times when different groups met and merged. There are still mysteries. We know about Neanderthals and Denisovans because we have their bones and their DNA, but what about groups like the hobbits on Flores? There's no clear sign that their DNA made it into modern humans. Maybe their island was just too far, or maybe their numbers were too small, or maybe their story ended before much mixing could happen. We may never know for sure. Still, the idea of absorption reminds us that history isn't always black and white. Sometimes it's all shades of grey. People change, adapt, and move on. The old ways don't disappear. They echo in new forms. Let's wrap up this part with a simple thought. When you walk outside, look at the people around you, or even look in the mirror. You're seeing the end result of millions of years of blending. Every face is a mix of ancient stories. Some lines are clear, others are hidden, but together they make up the human family. That's the real legacy of absorption. Not just survival, but a living, breathing mix of everything that came before. And as we keep going, remember this. Sometimes the biggest changes are the quietest. Not a sudden end, but a slow, steady blending. A group doesn't have to vanish to be gone from history. Sometimes it just becomes part of something new. The story continues, even if nobody remembers exactly how it started. Next, add in the pressure of a changing climate. Imagine all this mixing and merging happening while the world itself is shifting. That's where things get even more complicated. Picture this. You're sitting around a fire with your group. It's cold. The wind howls outside the cave, pushing icy air through every crack. Food is tight. You're hungry, but so is everyone else. Now imagine you're not just hungry for a day or a week, but for months. Year after year, things get harder. The world around you keeps changing, and you can't control it. The weather isn't what it used to be. Sometimes it rains too much, sometimes not at all. The animals you hunt are moving away or dying out. Plants you used to eat don't grow where you remember finding them. The rules you lived by no longer work. Survival gets tricky. This isn't just a story. It's what happened to many ancient humans. While groups were mixing and merging, the climate was shifting beneath their feet. A new ice age crept in, slowly but without mercy. Temperatures dropped, glaciers grew, forests turned to grasslands, then to frozen plains. Whole rivers changed their paths. Animals that once thrived vanished or moved far away. Imagine waking up each morning and feeling a little more desperate. The world you knew is slipping away, piece by piece. Let's get specific. Around 40,000 years ago, Europe and Asia started to get much colder. Summers were short and cool. Winters stretched on and on. Snow piled up outside the caves and shelters. Neanderthals, Denisovans, and modern humans all felt these changes, but not everyone handled them the same way. Neanderthals had lived through cold before. Their bodies were built for it, strong, wide, with short arms and legs to hold in heat. They hunted big game like mammoths and woolly rhinos. But as the climate got more extreme, those animals became harder to find. Forests shrank, open land spread out. Some animals died out completely. Neanderthals had to travel farther for food or try new hunting tricks. Modern humans, on the other hand, were used to change. They'd started out in Africa, where the climate could swing from wet to dry in a few years. They knew how to adapt, to try new foods, new tools, new ways of living. They fished rivers, dug up roots, caught birds and small animals. They moved camps more often. This flexibility gave them an edge when the world turned harsh. But it wasn't just about food or bodies. The weather affected everything. When it was cold, fires were harder to keep burning. Wood was scarce. Water sometimes froze solid. People had to huddle together for warmth. Babies and old people suffered the most. Small groups, already stretched thin, could shrink fast. A few bad winters in a row could wipe out a whole family line. And here's something wild. Climate didn't just change once. It swung back and forth, sometimes in just a few years. There were warm spells, then sudden freezes. The weather was unpredictable. Imagine planning for the future when you never know what next year will bring. It's like life is a game where the rules keep shifting. Now let's talk about how these changes pushed groups into each other's paths. As some areas became unlivable, families packed up and moved. Maybe they followed the herds. Maybe they searched for places with more plants or better water. But everyone was looking for the same safe spots. This meant more groups bumping into each other, sometimes competing, sometimes sharing, sometimes fighting. Crowding can lead to stress. It also spreads disease faster and makes it harder to get enough food for everyone. Sometimes two groups would end up sharing a valley or a river. At first they might keep their distance, but when survival is on the line, choices get tougher. Maybe you trade. Maybe you join forces. Maybe you try to outlast the other. The point is, the climate didn't just kill. It forced people together, and that changed everything. Let's go deeper and look at the evidence. Archaeologists have found signs of sudden climate shifts in the ground itself. Layers of ash from ancient fires, pollen from vanished plants, even tiny shells from lakes that dried up. In some caves, you can see layers where families lived, then suddenly stopped. Sometimes the cave fills with dust and animal bones. No people for hundreds of years. Then suddenly a new group moves in, bringing different tools and habits. It's like finding a pause in the story, then a new chapter starts. One famous example comes from a cave in France called Grotte du Renne. When scientists dug through the layers, they found Neanderthal tools, then a gap, then modern human tools above. In between, there's a thin layer of dirt full of ash and sand, evidence of a harsh, cold period when no one could survive there. The old group was forced out, or died out. When the weather improved, new people arrived. But climate wasn't the only pressure. As people crowded into the best spots, competition got fierce. If food was tight, groups might fight over a good cave or a valley with plenty of water. Sometimes, smaller groups just couldn't compete. They moved away or joined up with a bigger crowd to survive. If they didn't, they risked being left behind as the world changed. Now, let's zoom in on the animals. Big game like mammoths, reindeer, and bison follow the changing climate. When grasslands spread, the animals moved with them, but when the ice pushed south, the herd shrank. Hunters had to track them over longer distances. If you missed a migration, you might go hungry for weeks. A single failed hunt could mean disaster for your whole group. Some people became scavengers, picking over the leftovers from animal kills. Others learned to trap smaller animals like rabbits or birds. Some groups even started eating more plants and fish, learning new skills just to get by. The ones who could switch diets quickly were more likely to survive. Those who depended on just one kind of food were in trouble when that food ran out. It's easy to forget just how close to the edge these people lived. There was no backup plan, no supermarket down the road. If the weather turned bad, or the animals disappeared, you had to move or die. And moving wasn't easy either. New places meant new dangers, unknown land, new diseases, and sometimes unfriendly neighbours. Let's talk about conflict. When groups moved into the same area, things could get tense. Sometimes it was a standoff, each group watching the other, waiting to see what would happen. Other times it turned violent. There are hints in the bones, skulls with cracks, broken arms that healed crooked, arrow points stuck in ribs. But violence wasn't constant. Most groups were small, and fighting could be deadly for both sides. Sometimes the threat of conflict was enough to make people move on, but conflict didn't always mean fighting. Sometimes it was a quiet struggle. Who could gather more food? Who could find the best shelter? Who could survive the longest winter? If you lost that battle, your group might fade away. Maybe you joined another group, or maybe your story ended there. Now mix this with disease and absorption, and you start to see how all these pressures work together. The climate forced people into new lands. That brought them into contact with other groups, which meant new diseases, more competition, and sometimes blending of families. Each pressure made the others worse. Here's something I keep wondering about. Did anyone see it coming? Did they notice the changes and try to warn each other? Or did it feel like the world was just turning against them, little by little? There's no way to know. All we have are the clues left behind. Let's look at another side. How groups tried to cope with all of this. Some made new tools. When the weather got colder, people started making warmer clothes, sewing hides together with bone needles. They built better shelters, sometimes digging into hillsides to block the wind. Fires became more important, not just for warmth, but for cooking and safety. You needed more fuel, which meant more time spent gathering wood or bones to burn. But even smart changes weren't always enough. If the climate swung too fast, or if a group was already small, they might not make it. There's a real limit to how much you can adapt, especially if you're alone or low on resources. And sometimes it was pure bad luck. Maybe a group was in the wrong place when a cold snap hit. Maybe they missed the last herd of reindeer before winter set in. Maybe a sickness swept through the camp right as the food ran out. Survival could come down to being in the right place at the right time. Let's pause and think about the idea of survival of the fittest. It's easy to picture it as a contest, with the strongest always winning. But in these ancient times, survival was more about flexibility. Groups who could change their habits, learn from others, or even move quickly had a better shot. The ones who clung to the old ways or who couldn't adapt fast enough were left behind. What about Denisovans and the hobbits? For Denisovans, the story is even less clear. Their bones have been found mostly in Siberia, a place known for brutal cold. They must have been tough, but even toughness has limits. As the world shifted, maybe their small groups got cut off. Maybe the environment got too harsh, or maybe they were squeezed out by other humans moving in. The hobbits, out on their island, faced their own climate struggles. Rising seas could have shrunk their world. A big eruption from a nearby volcano might have covered their food sources in ash. We don't know all the details, but it's clear that when the world changes faster than you can keep up, things can unravel quickly. So, what does all this mean? The end of these groups wasn't just about losing a fight or being less smart. It was a slow squeeze: climate, competition, disease, and the struggle to adapt. Each pressure made the others worse. In some places, blending with other groups was the only way forward. In others, small groups just faded away. Their stories lost except for a few bones and some scattered tools. But here's what matters. None of this was simple. No single cause explains it all. It was a giant, messy tangle of changes: weather, food, conflict, disease, and luck. Sometimes things just pile up until they can't be fixed. The world around these humans was always shifting, and not everyone could keep up. In the end, only our branch of humans survived. Not because we were the best, but maybe because we were the most flexible or the luckiest, or because we found ways to mix and adapt. It's a reminder that survival isn't always fair or noble. Sometimes it's just about holding on a little longer, or changing just enough to fit what the world throws at you. Now, as we step back, think about what it means that we're the only ones left. All these pressures, climate, competition, disease, and the slow blending of groups came together to shape who we are. We carry the traces of those lost groups, not just in our DNA, but in the ways we cope with change. The story of humans is a story of survival, but also of loss, luck, and learning. As we move forward, we can ask, what did it mean for us to be the last one standing? And what can we learn from all those ancient cousins whose stories ended along the way? Maybe, deep down, we're still shaped by the world they knew, the cold, the hunger, the need to adapt. Their struggles echo in us even now. Let's take a step back and reflect on what it means to carry all these stories inside us. To be the last of a kind, shaped by a world that was never still. The journey from many to one wasn't just a straight line. It was a winding path, full of twists, turns, and quiet endings. And maybe that's what makes our story worth remembering. Now that we've followed the trail of these lost human cousins, let's step back and try to see the bigger picture. 4 kinds of humans once walked the earth together. They shared the same sunrises, felt the same chill wind, and worried about the same empty bellies. Today, only one branch is left. You, me, everyone alive now. It's easy to forget how recent and strange that is. If you look across the world today, you see people everywhere. Crowded cities, quiet villages, islands, forests and deserts. But there was a time when you could count all the people on Earth in a big sports stadium. The world was empty, wild and dangerous. In that wide-open world, 4 kinds of humans tried to survive. They met, mixed, and sometimes vanished. The question of why only our kind survived still hangs in the air. Was it about being smarter, tougher, just luckier, or was it a blend of everything? There isn't a single answer. It's more like a web than a straight line. Each thread, climate, food, disease, blending, pulled at the others. Sometimes just a small tug was enough to snap a line. Let's look at what this really means for us, here and now. We're used to thinking of ourselves as special, maybe even chosen. But the truth is, Our survival came down to a mix of tiny choices, accidents, and the grit to keep going. We're the result of survivors, people who could adapt, take in new ideas, and sometimes just hang on by their fingernails. Think about language. Today we talk, write, and share stories across the globe, but language itself may have been one of our secret weapons. The way we share ideas, warn each other, and pass down knowledge might have helped us outlast the others. Imagine sitting by a fire telling a story about a dangerous animal or a safe path through the woods. The group that could share these lessons had an edge. But there's more. Our ability to imagine, picture things that don't exist yet, may have played a part too. Art, music, and symbols helped us build tighter groups. A painting on a cave wall, a carved bead, or a song around the fire, these were more than decorations. They were ways to remember, to teach, and to hope for something better. That spark of imagination might have helped us survive the worst winters and the longest nights. Now, let's talk about something even deeper: cooperation. Humans are strange animals. We're good at working together even when we don't always get along. We can plan, share food, and help each other raise children. Other humans, like Neanderthals, did this too, but maybe not on the same scale. The power to build big networks, friends, allies, distant cousins, might have made the difference when things got hard. It's not just about surviving, though. It's about changing the world to fit us, instead of just fitting into the world. Our ancestors learned how to make fires last longer, build better shelters, and even shape the land. Over time, these small changes added up. We started to control more and more of our surroundings. That doesn't mean we were always careful or wise, but it does mean we learned to make the world a little less wild and a little more ours. Now, imagine standing at the edge of a cliff, looking back at all the people who came before. There's a sense of loss too. Every group that faded away took their stories, their songs, and their ways of seeing the world with them. We carry a few of their genes, maybe a few memories buried deep in our DNA, but most of what they knew is gone forever. That's the price of being the last ones left. But we didn't just inherit the Earth alone. Inside us, there are still tiny bits of Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA. They're not just ghosts in our blood. They're part of what makes us who we are. Maybe a piece of our immune system, or the colour of our skin, or the shape of our skull. It's easy to think of these groups as lost, but in some small ways, they're still here, living on through us. What can we learn from all of this? Maybe the biggest lesson is that survival is messy. It's not always about being the strongest or even the smartest. Sometimes it comes down to who can bend without breaking, who can learn a new skill, or who can make peace with new neighbours. The world changed, and we changed with it. Sometimes fast, sometimes slow, but always moving forward. And here's another thing. The story isn't just about endings, it's about beginnings too. Every time a group disappeared, another group found a way to keep going. When Neanderthals vanished from Europe, humans filled the empty caves. When Denisovans faded from the mountains, their genes kept travelling inside new families. Even the hobbits, so distant and strange, remind us how many ways there are to be human. What does it mean to be the only kind left? Maybe it means we have a bigger job than we realise. We're the keepers of all those old stories, even the ones we can't remember. We're the last link in a chain stretching back millions of years. Each step we take, each choice we make carries the weight of everyone who came before. But it's not just a burden, it's also a gift. We get to wonder, to explore, to imagine what might have been. We get to fill in the blanks even when the real answers are lost. There's something comforting about that. Even when we don't know everything, we can still ask the questions. Take a moment and picture those ancient nights. Small fires glowing in the dark, voices low and careful, eyes watching the shadows. Each group thought they were the centre of the world. Each group loved, struggled, and hoped for a better tomorrow. In a way, We're not so different now. We still gather, tell stories, and dream about what comes next. If there's one thing that stands out, it's how much we owe to those quiet survivors. They faced ice, hunger, and fear, but they kept moving. Their footsteps wore trails into the ground. Their hands shaped tools, cooked food, and comforted children. Every little victory, catching a fish, making a friend, finding a safe place to sleep, pushed us one step closer to now. Sometimes, history feels like a long list of disasters, extinctions, collapses, lost groups. But hidden inside all those endings are new beginnings. Every empty cave became someone's shelter. Every lost song made space for a new melody. Even when things fell apart, there was always a chance for something new to grow. What about the things we'll never know? There are so many questions with no answers. What did Denisovans dream about? What songs did Neanderthals sing to their children? How did the hobbits tell each other stories on stormy nights? We can guess, but we'll never really know. That's part of the mystery. Here's the thing, mystery isn't always a problem. Sometimes it's what keeps the story alive. Not knowing means we get to imagine, to wonder, to fill in the spaces with our own ideas. It's a reminder that the past isn't just a list of facts. It's a living puzzle, changing every time we learn something new. And maybe that's the real heart of it. Our kind survived because we learned to live with uncertainty. We made plans, but we also learned to let go. We built things, but we also watched them crumble. We lost people, families, even whole groups, but we kept moving forward. That's not just history. It's the story of being human. The world those early humans knew is gone, but the lessons remain. Adapt when you can, help each other, and don't be afraid to start again. When the cold sets in, find a new fire. When the path disappears, make your own trail. When you lose something, look for what's left and build from there. Now, as the night deepens, think about how far we've come. From small fires in ancient caves to cities that glow all night. From whispered warnings to songs that travel around the globe in seconds. We're still telling stories, still reaching for something just out of sight. You might wonder, will we ever share the world with another kind of human again? Is it possible someday that we'll find lost cousins hiding in the shadows, or even create new branches ourselves? It's hard to say. The future is as full of surprises as the past. But if there's one thing we know, it's that change never stops. The story keeps unfolding, line by line. And as we drift into the quiet, remember this. Our place on Earth isn't promised. We're here because someone long ago refused to give up. Because they learned, blended, and tried new things. Because they shared what they knew, built fires in the dark and cared for each other, even when hope was thin. We don't walk alone, even now. We carry the dreams and struggles of all those lost groups. Their courage, their hopes, and even their mistakes, they're still with us. Every time we adapt, every time we help someone else, every time we face a new challenge, we echo their story. So maybe the real lesson is simple. Change is part of life, loss is too. But as long as we remember, as long as we wonder, as long as we keep moving forward, the story continues. Each of us is a new chapter, built on all the ones that came before. As you settle in, let these thoughts drift through your mind. The world is always changing, but so are we. We're built for it. That's why we're here. That's why the story didn't end. And somewhere, deep down, we're all still sitting by that ancient fire, dreaming about tomorrow. May your dreams tonight be gentle. May you find warmth, comfort, and a sense that you belong to something much bigger. A story that began long before you and will keep going long after. Sleep well.